I'm going to try and give you a few indicators today about how the brain works, how the nose works with the brain, and a bit about creativity and how culture and society influences the sense that you're wearing, and vice versa. These two ladies are going to give out some scent strips at the moment, now, because we can't talk about scent unless we're smelling something. So you're very lucky today. This side is getting a little strip of mandarin. I was in Calabria yesterday, which is where mandarin and bergamot for the fragrance industry is grown. About 95% of bergamot comes from Calabria. It's a very small region in southern Italy. It's a cross between a bitter orange and a lemon brought through the North Africans many years ago to Calabria. It's used in about 3/4 of every female perfume. What you're getting now is the essential oil. That's just one note. If you think of a perfume as a symphony, this is one note of that symphony. There could be 200 to 300 notes in any fragrance, especially a fine fragrance, maybe 400. So this is one note. It's a lovely note. It's one of my favourites. I love bergamot. And I guarantee that you'll remember that smell and this talk, because that's what fragrance does. It makes you remember things. On this side, you've got mandarin from the same region, and that is this year's crop. It's just picked and just been processed, so you're very lucky. Before it's gone into any perfume, Gabrielle, the research assistant, gave us some yesterday. So hot off the press, as it were. So, now you're smelling. Have a little scent. It's a very citrusy note. Now the reason you'll remember that, and probably related to this evening, is because your nose here is connected to someone's mobile phone. So the nose is connected to what's called the limbic system, right here in the front of your brain. The limbic system is probably the last primitive part of your brain. You don't have a choice how it works. When something goes up the nose in here to your limbic system, you don't process it. There's no cognitive process as there is with visuals or auditory or touch. It's straight in, so you have no choice. And it's also where your emotions and your memories lie. So that's why smell is such an evocative and strong emotional response. You get it first, it has an impact, and then you process it and relate it to your life. Now, because it's so emotional, it's also very sensual. And obviously, fine fragrances for women has been a very sensual métier for a couple of 100 years at least. Now, in terms of sensuality, there's been a lot of myths around pheromones, how they work, why fragrances work. Well, human beings don't actually use pheromones. We don't have pheromones. If we did, I'd be a millionaire. It would be very easy. We'd just sell them in bottles and everybody would go off and go forth and multiply, to want of a better word. But that's not the way it works. We're a bit more further down the evolutionary scale. But what we do is we sense, through the olfactory system, each other's DNA. And we seek out DNA that is different to ours, that would make a good match. Now, contrary to popular belief, wearing a fragrance or a perfume will not mask that DNA or that natural smell or odour or attraction to you. It will actually accentuate it, advertise it. The animal kingdom does this too. When an animal's rolling in the grass or in dung, it's saying, I'm here, come and check out my DNA. So it complements and it pulls people in. So you're not actually masking it. So when you've got these elements, very emotional, straight to the brain, very deep smelling of DNA, you can imagine that with society and culture and people's experiences is a very complex mixture for a perfumer. And this is the key to it. A perfumer doesn't just take a formula that he thinks is going to work for you. You actually tell him what's going to work. Because there's a terribly strong link between culture, society, design, creativity, and the perfumer and the perfumer's creation. And you can see this throughout history. If you go for a little tour around this last century, starting in the 20s is probably a good place to start, with Chanel, Coco Chanel. Chanel No. 5 was the first fragrance that used a synthetic aldehyde as its main powerful note. Still does today, virtually the same formula. And it was a reflection of total modernity. If you imagine the euphoric post-war years of the 20s, dancing everywhere, drinking, smoking, everybody having a great time after the war. really let it rip. It was extreme. Art was doing the same thing. It went from literalism to cubism, impressionism. This was modernity, and the fragrance industry picked up on that. Women, particularly, were captains of industry after the war. So fragrances were extreme. And in extreme notes, you were having lots more spicy, oriental, and modern synthetic notes. Whereas in recession times, through the wars, which didn't come too far afterwards, or the 35, the Depression, there's a complete change to more traditional, comfortable notes in a fragrance. And that's seen in fashion. People go to what's comfortable and comforting for them. So people go back to floral notes. So there's a real up and down from recession, from boom and bust. You go into the 40s, the post-war years, again, the euphoria of the post-war years, there was a lot more extreme fragrance came out. It was designer-led. Dior, Rochas, Piaget, these all had fragrances. Miss Dior, which is still available today. These were powerful, extreme fragrances, making a statement. And people wanted that. It's a bit of decadence, a bit of fun. But then again, through the 50s, you have another influence that comes through into it. This is accessibility. Everybody wanted a bit of everything in the 50s. So the fragrances had to become accessible. So again, they got softer. They got more acceptable. And the fashion and the trend became more florals. But this time they had green florals and light white florals. So they were getting more complex, but they were still going away from the more extreme and statement-led fragrances. So you can see that art and society is feeding back in. So whatever you're feeling as a woman, buying perfume, that's what a fragrance manufacturer, a brand owner, and a perfumer is picking up on and trying to find out, and trying to make something that speaks back to you. And if you go to the 60s is a bit of a strange anomaly, because fragrance houses didn't think the youth market was worth bothering with. They didn't make anything for them. It was very simplistic. This is where you get essential oils coming in, patchouli, sandalwood, musks. Very simple fragrances that people did themselves. They didn't think the flower power generation had any money. They're probably right in many cases. But, and then, so there was really very little done through the 60s in terms of fragrance creation that was really worth noting. But then you come to the 70s, and the USA really led this with the maturity of brands and how brands started working. So then you got also the women's lib throughout USA and the rest of Europe. Sophisticated, powerful, strong women, working families. We've heard a lot about the perfect woman and how it doesn't actually exist this evening. Gender roles. But women were wanting to be more confident. So you'd have thought they would be more powerful than extreme fragrances. But no, you forget. The economic situation. There's a complete link to economics and design in this story. Or freakonomics, as we should probably say these days. There were 2 oil prices in the 70s. Really serious depressions, worries. So these confident, liberated women didn't get a chance to express themselves quite how they possibly wanted. So we were back to florals again. More complex florals, better florals, almost, as we say, accessorized florals. Then the 80s came. Now that's when it went a bit crazy. Big hair, big shoulder pads, powerful women, Wall Street, money, 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 champagne, fast cars. The hair, the fragrance arrived in the room before you did. Poison, obsession, all these really powerful, strong statement fragrances. This is what we had in the 80s. Then towards the end of the 80s, we had the crash. Back to florals, but much more complex florals. But also with these, we had one new one, which was a marine note, like an aqua note. And that led through to the 90s, which was very politically correct. Everybody wanted to love each other. Hug a tree, hug a bunny, hug each other. You couldn't annoy anybody. It was very youth-orientated as well. So the trends became a lot more light, fresh, clean, aqua, with florals as well. And then we went into 2000s. And because everything gets complicated in the 2000s, everything's complex now. I think it was Hawkins who said the 21st century is a century of complexity. It certainly is, and it is for designers, and it is for perfume designers as well. Quite simply because we want everything all the time, every time. The boom and bust years seem to be happening so much more quickly, it can happen one week to another. So you have to be able to cater for every trend both the Freakonomic trend, the fashion trend, and everything. So Carolina's telling me to stop. I'm just going to give you one last thought before you go. Your olfactory system, your sense of smell and taste, diminishes as you get older. Now, when you're just retiring and you can afford that beautiful bottle of wine and that lovely meal without any disturbances, your ability to taste and smell it is getting less and less, unless you practice. If you practice, it will stay up. Smell something every day. Teach yourself to smell. Doesn't have to be a perfume. I'd obviously prefer it if it were. But it could be anything. It could be food, it could be nature, it can be life, your children, each other. Just teach your nose to smell and keep doing it, and it will last till you die, and you'll have a much more richer and fulfilled life. I assure you of that.
For everybody, the last local talk we have. This is our next speaker is Steven Bulla from the International Fragrance Association, and he's going to talk about scent of a woman.
Thank you. Well, not necessarily just women, this applies to everybody. Before we start, the ladies here are going to come round and give you a little, what we call a scent strip. Because you can't talk about fragrance without smelling something. So you're going to smell something, first of all. There's two. On this side, you've got Bergamot, and this side, you've got Mandarin. These are the essential oils you're smelling now. So they're from Calabria, which is a little region on the toe of Italy. I was there yesterday, so the Mandarin is this year's first crop on the harvest, pressed only last week. The Bergamot, that's last year's because they're only just harvesting now. It's one note. If you imagine a fragrance, a fine fragrance is a symphony, can have about 250, 300 different materials all in concert and making chords and different accords. This is one note. This is Bergamot. You'll find Bergamot in about 2/3 of every female fine fragrance. It's a wonderful citrusy smell. It's beautiful. It's a cross between a bitter orange and a lemon. That's the fruit. You don't really eat it, but the oil comes out of the skin and smells beautiful. It also complements other fragrance notes, such as the spices and wood and leather ones as well. That's why it's so popular. And Mandarin is just a beautiful citrus top note. It smells of sunshine and Christmas. And I see you've had chocolate, hot chocolate out there as well, so orange and chocolate's a good combination. So I'm going to talk to you today. Now you're all smelling happily. You'll remember this talk, and every time you smell Mandarin, you'll remember this, and there's a reason for that. It's because your nose is directly linked to what's called the limbic system in your brain. Now, this is the last primitive part of our brain. It's the seat of emotions and memories. And because it's the primitive part, it doesn't actually have any sort of what we call editing for it. There's no processing. It goes straight in. With visual and auditory and touch, you have some processing in the brain where you have to interpret it and do some switches have to light up. But the limbic system, it's straight in, so you don't really have any choice. And that's why it's so emotive, and the memories are so strong. And that's also why it's very sensual. And that's what we're talking about today, the scent of a woman, the sensual scent, and how that comes about. So as well as this emotion and memories that we're trying to generate, telling a story with a fragrance, the story begins, we're not just sitting here getting pheromones, putting them in something and making it work and making you like it. Because, well, pheromones, we don't use them as human beings. We don't have them. It's a myth. Anyone who's trying to sell you a pheromone product, we don't use them. We're a bit too advanced. If we did, I'd be a millionaire. I wouldn't be here. I'd be on a yacht somewhere on a Caribbean island. It's not that simple. Some insects, some animals do use still pheromones, chemical reaction, but we don't. But what we do is we sense each other's DNA using the olfactory system. We seek out others' DNA that isn't the same as ours, so that it would make us a good match. And we use our sense of smell to do it. Now, contrary to some myths and common beliefs, wearing a fragrance doesn't actually mask that natural smell or your ability to identify your perfect partner's DNA. It actually advertises and accentuates it and complements it, but only if you choose it and you like it. Because if it's yours and you like it, you feel confident, you feel nice, and it will be a scent that's expressing your DNA and yours own emotions about different types of smell. And I told you they would do it. Every time I take a sniff, everybody does it. It's lovely. So the creative side is a direct reflection of society and culture, as is design and art and what we do. It's about you. There's one other element which is very important, certainly in the last 20th century, and that is economics. There's a clear pattern about fragrance trends through the 20th century, and it's directed to not only art and creativity and culture, but an economic element too. Times of boom and bust. Times of boom, we get very expressive and extreme in the type of fragrances we want, decadent, really strong, powerful ones. Times of recession, we go back to comfort, things we know and love and feel at home with, florals, essentially. So if you start at the 20s, we look at Coco Chanel. After the war, the post-war euphoria, women were captains of industry, modernity was everywhere. Everything was about modernity. In art, went from literalism to expressionism, cubism. Everything was exploding in extremes. And fragrance was the same. The Chanel No. 5 was the first fragrance to be overdosed with a synthetic aldehyde. And it was incredibly popular. It was a floral, but it was like no other floral anybody had seen. And then you go to the 30s, the recession, the Big Depression, back to florals again. So there's a complete link. You come back to 45, post-war years, post-war euphoria. The boom was very much designer-led. So you had Miss Dior, Femme by Rochard. These were designer houses leading, again, the euphoria. People wanted to express themselves. So the fragrances became much more complex, much more extreme, much more powerful, much more expressive about different ideas, not just the comfort of home and florals. Then you get to the 50s, and something starts happening again, something different. 50s is all about accessibility. The market becomes a mass market. The USA is exploding. Everybody wants something of everything. Everybody wants a fridge, everybody wants a house, everybody wants a car, everybody wants a nice dress, everybody wants to smell great. Everybody wants that designer perfume. We went from haute couture to prêt-à-porter. We went from parfum to eau de toilette. So it spread out the market. So we started diversifying. And again, using florals, but using accessorized florals. So the market became a lot bigger. The 60s, everybody forgot about the 60s. Fragrance houses didn't really think that the flower power generation wanted to buy expensive scents. They may have had something, they're too busy smelling flowers and fruits like that. Maybe they were right, I don't know, they forgot about them. So in the 60s we had a real explosion in essences, essential oils. We had patchouli, sandalwood, musks. These were really powerful, quite pungent as well, not particularly nice in some cases, but very distinctive. I mean, you know, hippies and patchouli is just, it's a smell of silk and everything. It's synonymous. So the 60s was a bit strange. But then you come to the 70s, and you've got women's liberation, you've got economic independence in America, you've got brands really getting into their own in America, starting to find out what makes people tick and what makes people buy things. So you get Estee Lauder, Avon, Revlon, all these companies starting to make, like the 50s, accessible fragrances. Again, these, you would have thought they would go more expressive, more extreme, using a lot of spicy, oriental notes, woody notes, leathery notes, sweet notes. No, they went back to florals, and that's the economics again. We had 2 oil crises in the 70s. So there was austerity everywhere. So then you come to the 80s. That's when you get extreme again. Big hair, big shoulder pads, your hair and your shoulder pads got into the room before you did, and so did your fragrance. Poison, these kind of phrases, obsession, these were powerful statements. They were persuasive, huge statements to make. You had lots of money and lots of attitude. Then you go into the crash at the end of the 80s, Black Monday. Straight back to florals again. The trend went really quickly from all these expressive, really statement-making decadent perfumes, back again to the safety and comfort of home and what you know, and floral notes. More complex floral notes though, and this time we had a new note, a marine note, like an aqua note. Remember all those adverts with men in surfboards going through the sea? Aqua. That was the marine note. It was an innovation from the fragrance industry. It gave the ability to create a whole new range of perfumes and add them to florals. So you not just had the floral, you had the comfort of the sea and water as well. So innovation was going at quite a large pace in the fragrance industry. And then we come to the 90s. Now the 90s is particularly politically correct and youth-orientated. Everybody wanted to hug each other, hug trees, hug rabbits, hug everybody else. You couldn't offend anybody, it was very politically correct. So the fragrances reflected that. They reflected what you and the customers were doing. They were trying to find out. They wanted everybody to love, and be happy, and be right on. More so than the 60s, in fact. But this time, they had money. So you had light, fresh, green notes. Florals as well, but you had aqua notes as well. You had a lot of things like Tommy Girl, Clinique's Happy. These were all fragrances that for the 90s. And I'm being told I've got run out of time. So we come up to now, 2000s. The complex century, the century of complexity, and of course, no different for design, consumer goods, and fragrances. Simple little movements in trends like this that used to take 10 years or 5 or 6 years are now happening week by week. We know what's happening in the world. We can be feeling austere one week, and we can be feeling flush and decadent the next week. So actually, what we have to do is deliver everything all the time. So the trend is everything for everybody. So it becomes much faster paced, hence why you've got a plethora of fragrances out there. The choice is amazing. It's gone from 80 in the 15 years ago to 800 a year launches now. So, you know, huge increase in how we do it. So that's 100 years of fragrance trends. I want to finish on one last little bit of information for you. Everybody, as they get older, their sense of smell and taste, because they're all linked, diminishes. Gets less and less and less. So just when you've got the time to sit down and you can possibly afford that lovely bottle of wine and that fine lunch and you can taste it and really enjoy it, this isn't working as it should be. But all is not lost. If you practice, if you smell every day, keep those receptors open, it won't. So teach yourself to smell. Smell everything. Smell fragrances. Obviously I prefer that. I work for the industry, but smell nature, smell each other, smell your children. Just every day, keep smelling something, keep those receptors open, and as you get older, keep it going, because then, well into your 90s, you'll have a perfectly working olfactory system, and you'll be able to taste that lovely bottle of Margaux when you can finally afford it. Okay, thanks very much.